Again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our third presentation of the day on IATA Gender Diversity 25 by 2025 campaign to enhance the development of women in aviation. The presentation will be made by Ms. Adefunke Adeyemi, who is IATA's Regional Director, Advocacy and Strategic Relations, Africa. After the presentation, we will take questions from the floor, and this shall run for a total of 20 minutes. Funke, you have the floor to take us through your very informative presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thanks to the AFRAA team for the invitation. Good day to all participants. The journey of 25 by 2025 started with a presentation and some research that was done by IATA in 2017, looking at the participation of women in aviation generally, and also women in aviation in particular on senior or leadership and technical roles. This slide shows us some interesting data, some of which we've heard already from previous speakers, but it's a good visual reminder of where things stood at that time and also where things stand today. So the share of women in senior executive roles between aviation and other industries was assessed. And we saw that the predominance of women at senior executive level were in the HR department, while in the technical departments and the C-suite, the CEO, CFO, COO, CO, and CCOs, the women's participation was extremely low. We also did a comparison of the participation of men in different regions of the world in aviation compared to that of women. And we can see here from the slides, the overwhelmingly pink bars showing that men dominate senior roles in aviation across the regions. Next slide, please. We also looked at some interesting numbers in 2018 on the technical side. And I know that Rafaela and some of our other speakers have shared some of this information, but it was interesting for us to be able to break down, get a breakdown of female pilot participation across different parts of the world. And this shows the airlines with the most female pilots as at 2018. The numbers would not have moved significantly between 2018 and 2019. And then of course, in 2020, COVID hit. So we can take this as still quite indicative of what the reality on the ground is. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. And of course, the issue of gender equality is a development imperative of the United Nations under its Sustainable Development Goals. And we heard this very well articulated by our colleague and sister from ICAO who just presented. And some of these matrix, again, are showing that while about 40–45% of the industry are women, we already see from the numbers that have been shown that it starts to decrease once it's time to start moving up into senior management positions. And also in the technical roles, the numbers are still quite low. We can move to the next slide. So again, we kept tracking these numbers from 2017 when we did the initial body of research. 2018, we continued to gather data and metrics from around the world. And also in 2019, we decided that we were going to do something about this because the numbers are quite startling. We started first with IATA though. Internally, we began with some initiatives in 2017 that covered diversity and inclusion. And over time, we added equity. And diversity and inclusion initiatives were under a program called Mosaic, which is, as you know, a mosaic is something of many colors and many pieces. And under the Mosaic program, we had a number of initiatives that looked at how we could support our women leaders in the organization to grow in their careers and go into senior roles. And then we expanded the initiative outward to how we could support the industry in a wider sense. And so the 25 by 2025 initiative is an initiative under the wider umbrella initiative of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a definition here for DE&I, which we took from JetBlue Airlines because it's quite encompassing and quite interesting. And in particular, this was their cabin crew department that actually has a dedicated DE&I focus. And so the definition, which applies not just to airlines, but to all parts of the industry, defines diversity as encompassing representation of multiple identities, experiences, and perspectives, centering on variance as a valued addition. And they say that this focuses on who is in the room, meaning all are seen, heard, identified, and valued. In equity, it means promoting fair treatment, opportunity, and advancement of all people, focusing on striving to identify and remove historical and present barriers and things like bias. And inclusion also focuses on extending a sense of belonging in order to create an environment where all, this here says crew members because of where it came from, but all members can contribute fully to the organization's success. Next slide. So what is the 25 by 2025 initiative? Well, it is an initiative that is designed to help increase the gender gap systematically and with clear performance indicators, particularly in leadership and technical roles. It was formally launched in 2019, and the campaign was designed to close this gender gap in aviation that we've all heard about thus far. At the inaugural IATA Diversity and Inclusion Awards, which we started and commenced in 2019 during our Seoul annual general meeting, the CEO of Air New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, challenged the industry to demonstrate progress on changing the gender paradigm. And that planted the seed for 25 by 2025. The ultimate target for this initiative, even though it has 25 all over the place, is actually 50% participation of women in aviation, particularly in senior roles and in technical or underrepresented areas within the industry. However, the 25 by 2025 commitment is flexible enough to be embraced by airlines and by other players across the aviation value chain who are advanced in their gender diversity journey by committing to an improvement of 25%, or those who are just starting this journey by committing to 25% representation as a starting point. This is not a pledge for quotas, but it is rather a breeding ground to shift diversity within the industry and to create and sharing innovative processes, policies, and mindsets, and a platform where best practices can be shared by airlines and across the entire value chain. What is our recommendation from 25 by 2025? It is that airlines and other players in the industry should define, first of all, commit to this kind of initiative where it is a systematic approach and an intentional and deliberate approach to closing the gender gap in these areas, and to define realistic targets against their current positions on these issues, and also to learn and inspire from best practices to reach those objectives. IATA is also committed to the target internally, and we will provide a forum for those best practice sharing. So we act as a facilitator of information across the different players in the industry who are committed or participating in the initiative, and will support the airlines and other players in reporting their metrics and to share those annually in terms of progress of work. So next slide, please. So what is that 25 by 2025. Well, the industry, these are pledges or commitments that the industry has made on the issue of closing the gender gap in aviation. One, to increase the number of women in senior positions, and this is by 2025 by 25%, or up to a minimum of 25% by 2025. And the other is increasing the number of women in underrepresented areas within their airlines. Again, these are technical areas, pilots, technicians, engineers, and so on. Beyond the airlines as well, it's also looking at the other players, airports, ANSPs, and the other players within the ecosystem. It is increasing female nominations to their airlines, from the airlines rather, to IATA governance roles. So the IATA is structured in terms of its governance with a board and several committees of that board and advisory councils and working groups. And we encourage airlines to nominate more women into these respective governance groups up to a minimum, so that we can have those groups collectively and individually having up to a minimum of 25%, working with us, IATA, and the partners to increase the number of women appointed to IATA governance roles, and also reporting annually on their key diversity metrics. This is for the industry. Now, we as IATA, as an organization, have also committed to this pledge. And one of those commitments is to create a forum for sharing the best practices, so to be able to enable this platform, collating the industry metrics in an annual update, so being able to track progress on these percentages and on these targets, to increase the number of women in our own management and senior structure in the strategic leadership and management committees, and at director roles to a minimum of 25%. I'm happy to mention that within IATA, every single division within IATA has a number of women directors who are running their different portfolios. The other is increasing the number of women appointed to IATA governance roles, as we've said already. So it's the second part of the coin, and increasing the number of women participating at all events, panels, and conferences to a minimum of 25% for all events that we run. I was sharing some joke with Maureen yesterday when we were just chatting and preparing for this, that I've seen many manels where there's a panel and it is full of men. I would like to see this picture change more and more as we continue to work towards achieving these targets. Next slide, please. So the 25 by 2025 initiative is so important because in the context of the COVID pandemic that has so drastically changed and impacted our industry, it has also prompted us to look at things through new lenses or through more open lenses. It has prompted our membership and the ecosystem to place a greater focus on gender balance, especially as we're rebuilding. Many airlines were forced to close down. Many airlines were forced to suspend operations for so many months. And as we're starting again, and many of those in that period, many of those airlines had no choice but to let some of their staff go. And so in this moment, as we're starting and rebuilding the industry, this is a critical point in airline and ecosystem, aviation ecosystem life cycle, to start to include more women and other minority groups into aviation, particularly in those critical areas of technical operations and leadership. It's also important for us to challenge the status quo because we have blind spots about this particular issue, which has been unearthed by the different research we have seen and also by the data that has been shared all along. And advancing the role of women and providing everyone with equal opportunity. We know the numbers already, but it's important to highlight here that from 2017, when we were doing the analysis, tracking them year by year, the numbers did not really change much. CEOs still about 3%, so not really moving. Again, in terms of pilots, within the 5% range, just moving by a few decibels, and airline captains and so on. So the numbers haven't moved too much. And in fact, in 2021, this June, Oliver Wyman did a recent survey and research of over 450 women and men in leadership and technical roles in aviation. And these numbers, again, are still looking quite similar. But in theirs, they also did one on gender pay. And they discovered that there is a gap of between 7 to 15 times the amount paid to men in the industry compared to women. And so, with all of the stuff that's going on, gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it is also good for business. We've heard many quotes over the years that women are very good for business, and also other diversity is good for business. And diverse teams are more innovative, they're more adaptive to change, more resilient, and they perform better. And this is based on data and analysis from certain reports, McKinsey's Women in the Workplace in 2020 and Women in Aviation International. These are some of the links, and of course, this will be made available to you all. Next slide as we round up. This is the participation to date in the 25 by 2025 initiative. We have 82 signatories, out of which we have 3 airlines in Africa, Egypt Air, Kenya Airways, and Rwanda. We would like to see more African airlines signing up to this initiative and committing to this, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's a development initiative, but because it will support the industry as it rebuilds and as it innovates and adapts itself for the future of aviation. And it is putting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the heart of our restart and recovery efforts. Next slide. This representation, the geographical distribution, shows you the collective impact that it is around the world. It's about half of the RTKs of our members globally. And this is the distribution. We see that Africa is still tracking lower than the rest of the world, particularly Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean. And there's room for improvement here for the Africans. So what is our call to action? What do we need from you for 25 by 2025? Next slide. It's time for the airlines. Oh, before I go to the next slide, this is an interesting example of where many of our airlines in the continent are starting to take this initiative quite seriously. And Ethiopian Airlines has actually always been quite prominent and in the forefront of showcasing women. And I remember in December 2017, there was a flight from Addis Ababa to one of the points in Nigeria. I believe it was Enugu. And it was an all-female flight, not just the pilot or captain, but also the flight officers, the crew, the engineers, and the technicians that supported that entire flight, including the ground management on both sides. And there was a quote from the chairperson of the House Committee on Aviation in Nigeria saying that the successful operation of the all-female flight is an incentive to women to realize that the aviation industry is an attractive sector where they can rise to their highest potential. And this is a very important quote, particularly for our next session, when we'll be talking about how we can encourage more people into the industry. So our ask as we go into the next slide and as we conclude is for us to continue to support this initiative. These are suggested actions for the airlines and industry. One is to encourage all our members and our partners who are not yet signatories to sign up. Is also to demonstrate visible leadership, including promoting 25 by 2025 at industry events and at every opportunity that we have. Leadership commitment to increasing and closing the gender gap is crucial to ensuring that we can really make this happen, particularly at leadership level and in technical and underrepresented roles. We are also calling for support for to collaborate across the industry to share best practices. And most importantly, so that we can continue to monitor progress, is that we would call for submission of data from airlines for 25 by 2025, tracking the metrics of how they're performing against the 25 by 2025 targets. The last slide. Okay, we're building momentum for diversity and inclusion. In 2021, we're starting with our baseline for reporting. We were going to start in 2020, but because of COVID, we had to move it up. So the baseline for reporting for all the members that you see in that picture is this year, and we're collecting data, and we urge our members in Africa to kindly, sign up and also to send in their data. And then the second is in next year, we'll be developing a playbook of best practices on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then by 2023, we intend to publish a report on gender equality within the aviation sector. Finally, looking at examples of what airlines in other regions and across the world are doing, there are a few that we can share here that airlines and other players in the industry can immediately start implementing within their own organizations. One is that commitment at board and executive management level to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to closing the gender gap. Two, being intentional on DE&I in the hiring and the recruitment processes, particularly for senior roles and for technical and operational roles. Three, appointing DE&I champions across all departments of the organization or within the organization who ensure that they will be driving the achievement of these targets. Four, DE&I seminars that focus on some of these hidden and obvious barriers for closing the gender gap, like bias, like cultural considerations, socialization, and current trends, and also deliberate policies on women empowerment within the organization. This is what I call manpowerment, where the men and the senior men in particular make it their own responsibility to champion the cause of talented women within their organizations, to see them grow and enhance their careers. We also have job and career fairs for women, for youth, and even those with disabilities. Remember, diversity, equity, and inclusion is for all. Also for innovation challenges that can attract the youth. Paying it forward initiatives where, for example, a pilot in an airline, can bring some of the students from the school that he attended to come and see a day in the life of a pilot in their airline, of course, with the, in collaboration with the airline and the management, and these kinds of initiatives. Home away from home at work for mothers and for parents. It's not just mothers who look after children, for parents that make it conducive for them in the period where their children are most dependent, to support them and to be able to continue their careers. And of course, wellness and balance initiatives. These are all important things that can be relatively quickly introduced within an organization. And so as I conclude and wrap up, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a development imperative for any organization. And as Michelle Obama said, she said, no country can ever truly flourish if it stifles the potential of its women and deprives itself of their contribution, the contribution of half of its citizens. We already know that the numbers show a half 50-50 participation of men and women in aviation, but the other side of those numbers show such a wide gap in participation in senior roles and in leadership. So let's apply the same quote to the industry and ensure that we do what we need to do and all that we can to close the gap. Thank you very much. Maureen, over to you.